It already feels like a lifetime ago that I was out in Munich, Germany for the High End HiFi Show 2024, which really is an amazing event. It's definitely one that you should have on your bucket list if you've not attended before, or maybe if you live in Europe anyway, because it really opens your eyes, I think, to the sheer scale and size and enormity and diversity of the whole hi-fi scene. Now, of course, not every brand is represented at the show, but there are a hell of a lot that are. I think there's way too much for anybody to see in one day, and I think probably way too much for anybody to see in 2 days. It really is a huge show. But I was there for the full 4 days, and that is where I have to thank Chord Electronics for their support, purely for the show videos that I've created, because their support allows me to be there for the full 4 days, basically due to the costs involved. And I would say from the full 4 days, I still hardly saw any of the show because I was fully focused on shooting videos or really shooting interviews. I spent 2.5 days running around the show, pretty much shooting different interviews with different manufacturers about their new and latest products. And then I spent about a day and a half trying to get nice quality, interesting, what we call in video terms B-roll, different clips and shots of just different systems and different interesting things that were there. And I wish I had 4 days just to do that, and maybe 4 days just to do interviews. That is the sheer enormity of the task when you're trying to do all of this as a single sole creator. Hopefully you have already watched my main show coverage video where I speak to about 10 different manufacturers, again about their new products that are coming this year. And I really put my heart and soul into the production values of that video. If you have watched it, I really hope you enjoyed it, as it may well be the last of that type of video that I create. We will see. However, I couldn't include everything in it because it would have been well over 2 hours long. So I decided I would save some of the interviews for this, a second video. And I'm going to start with an interview with Richard Brain, who is the inventor and I think the owner of Supatrac. And Supatrac are a very well known manufacturer of tone arms. And I actually spoke to Richard for about an hour after the interview because I was interested to find out more about his design. He's very clever, unique unipivot tone arm design, which unipivots off the back of the tone arm, which then stops any micro jitter and judder happening by the torsional forces of the record playing. So it's a really interesting design. I've never seen it before. So here I'm going to show you the interview with him. So I'm here with Richard from Supatrac, and Supatrac are now a famous brand for tone arms, with I think the Blackbird being your first tone arm that's become very, very popular with audiophiles. And yet you are showing here a brand new Nighthawk tone arm.
That's correct.
Which is super interesting. So can you tell me what makes a Supatrac tone arm unique in the first place, and then what makes the Nighthawk different to the Blackbird?
Yes. So the Blackbird was the first sideways unipivot tone arm, and the reason why that's important is because the point of the unipivot points away from the cartridge, so that when the record is playing, it's dragging the arm so that the pivot point makes perfect contact, dragging it straight towards the thrust surface, and that makes sure that the arm is very stable in the time axis, and the musical signal can't make it jiggle or move in the time axis, and so it times very beautifully, and that's the key to its success. It's a patented bearing design that I dreamed up during lockdown and made a prototype, and it sounded amazing, so I decided to patent it. It is the first arm of that kind. The Blackbird has had great response. We have Michael Freema saying it's fundamentally better, which I agree with, but it's great to have that kind of accolade from someone like him with a wealth of experience. We have just announced yesterday the Supatrac Nighthawk, as you say, and the Nighthawk is essentially the same design as the Blackbird, but because the Blackbird has been successful, and one of the guiding principles of the design of the Blackbird was rigidity to make sure the cartridge can't move in the time axis, I decided to abandon some of the constraints, the limitations that we had. For instance, the Blackbird fits under the lid of a Riga, a Technics, and a Linson deck, and many other decks, and you can play a full side without the arm hitting the lid, even if it's closed. But we found a lot of people were buying Blackbirds for very high-end turntables, most of which don't even have a lid at all, or not that kind of lid. And so it turned out that there's various restrictions we put on the original design, and that's been successful. So the question is, can we go further? Can we get any more? Can we eke an extra, it's traveling at 300 miles an hour. Can we get it up to 310? And so that's what the Nighthawk is about, is can we get more rigidity? And so the design is a design that's less universal. It will not fit on every turntable out there. It is going to be more expensive. It's more expensive to make, full stop, but it is more rigid. All the important parts of it structurally, from the point of view of opposing the impulse forces on the cartridge and the stylus, all of those components have been made more rigid. Even though we're at the prototype stage still, I am hearing a little bit of extra punch and detail and things coming out, realizing there's still more on the record. And I was worried that with the Blackbird I had made it so good that it would be very, very difficult to get something extra out, and go further. But in fact, I'm happy that the Nighthawk has actually achieved that, and it's got more of the things that I love about the Blackbird. It's got more punch, more instrument separation, more realism, more presence, more acoustic space, three-dimensional space delivered when you listen to recordings that are well made. And so as far as I can tell so far with this prototype, the extra rigidity is paying off, and we're getting more of the sound that I love, the energy, the excitement, the thrill of listening to often a great old piece of vinyl that cost you £3 at Oxfam, and you find there's a miraculous, huge body of vinyl out there.
Well, it's certainly an interesting design. It's got a very interesting aesthetic. I'd love to try one at some point, but we haven't got. I'd love to talk to you more about it. We just don't have the time. But Richard, thank you very much for coming on camera and talking to me. Really appreciate it. Thank you. While I am on the subject of turntables, I got to meet a brand new turntable manufacturer called Silent Audio. The designer is somebody I know called Marko Borovac. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. And they have a brand new turntable which is trying to offer really a lot of technology for not a lot of money, which is always a nice way round. It has a really well designed and constructed plinth made from Baltic birch plywood that has reservoirs that are filled with sand. It has a nice motor system with drive electronics that use R2R technology, similar to that used in DACs, but don't panic, this is still an all analog device. There is a very nice quality belt for the turntable at this price, and a heavy aluminium platter, and a very clever, also unipivot designed tone arm that is magnetically stabilized. I've not seen that before. And overall, I think the turntable just looked nice. In particular, the finish on the plinth, the way that was done, really very impressive stuff. And I got to listen to the Silent Audio turntable playing through a system through the brand new MoFi SourcePoint 888 speakers. So it sounded really good to me. So that was, really great and a fantastic thing. So I would say this is a new brand and a new product range potentially to keep an eye out for. And while we're talking about turntables, I need to go right to the other end of the spectrum or extreme, because I got to speak to Craig Milnes from Wilson Benesch. And Wilson Benesch have designed a new turntable, or really a new direct drive turntable mechanism, which is using a 15-inch drive system. And apparently this is like a 15-year project development, which is really something. So it's huge, a huge drive mechanism. So that was pretty wild to see in the flesh. And then the tone arm that's been designed to go with this turntable, it looks like something NASA might have designed. One thing we forgot to speak about was the fact that it has a mechanical VTA adjustment. So from an app, you can adjust the VTA of the tone arm. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Of course, this technology is very interesting, but it's not for us mere mortals at the moment in terms of cost and price. But I think, it's very interesting. And here is the interview with Craig Milnes. So I'm here with Craig Milnes, who is Design Director of Wilson Benesch. And Craig, thanks very much for coming on camera with me initially. But I wanted to ask you about this really unique, interesting design of a turntable. So can you maybe tell us about it? What makes it unique?
It would be impossible to cover it in a small amount of time, so I'm just going to focus on the key elements that differentiate it. So obviously the motor is one of the key elements that is one of the big things that have driven all kinds of developments in the past, and principally there are direct drives, which are Technics type designs, and you've got belt drives. This is a direct drive, but it's a very large motor, and it's a patent applied for design, which is 15 inches diameter, and has been collaboratively developed with Sheffield University and Sheffield Hallam University. And it gives a very, very low torque ripple, which is almost immeasurable. This is one of the key factors in the design. If you go to Professor Laithwaite and look for him on Google, you'll see a scientist from the 60s who described the classic design principles of motor design, and his basic is from the north. His basic point was, if it's a big one, it's better. The bigger, the better. And with direct drive systems, the larger the diameter, the more you can have a lower force that is driving it. Now, typically what you'll find with a Technic system and this kind of direct drive is a system which starts up rapidly and goes to speed and locks on. But for that, you have to pay a price, and that price is that you will get cogging and torque ripple. This design is completely different. It's a very, very wide gap, slotless, coreless coils. It's a three-phase synchronous design. So this design functions in a totally different way, and because of its 15-inch diameter, the three-phase system that is driving the rotor only moves in a very smooth fashion, which has never been possible before with direct drive systems. If we go to the tone arm, the starting point is the cartridge. And what we're trying to do here is put in a line of defense to try and reduce the amount of energy that's been transferred down the tone arm. So we have a titanium structure, which is a U-section, which is tessellated, and that is also matched with a fin at the top. So we get the highest possible specific stiffness at this point in the system, which reduces the energy that's been then transferred into the tone arm, which has got zero interference with, in other words, what I'm saying is there's no detachable head shell. So energy that flows down here has to go through a helix of carbon to the bearing, which is a unique design also, and enables the tone arm to be changed in less than a minute. This particular product is the Prime Meridian, a new product which has just been released. So this is a reduced version of the GMT System 1, and the principal difference is that this does not have the computer-controlled pneumatic suspension system. Other than that, the key features that I've already described are in this system as well.
Well, Craig, look, it's absolutely fascinating to talk to you about this. We could talk for hours. I'd love to learn more about this product. Thank you very much for coming on camera. Thank you. Now, to go fully the other way, I did go and speak to Marcin Ostapowicz from JCAT and XACT, the manufacturer of high-end music server, because they were showing their new upgraded version of their XACT S1 music server that I reviewed a few weeks ago, called the S1 Evo. And it features a much higher performance clock, some new isolation feet and some other better internals. And I have asked to get one, as I would really like to see what the difference is between the normal XACT S1, because that is already pretty awesome. And the S1 Evo was playing on a very interesting hi-fi system with some big horn speakers, but it was so hot in that room when I was in there, I didn't spend a huge amount of time there, and the interview that I conducted with Marcin was just really going over the basics. So I'm hoping I can get an S1 Evo music server in here soon, and then of course I can go into more detail to tell you all about it. Make sure you look out for that. Another company I spoke to more in depth was a company called B&M, which are a German high-end, active, I think in the main, speaker manufacturer. And B&M stands for Bax and Müller. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. And they have, by all accounts, generally designed quite large, very expensive, active speaker systems that are line array based. And normally line array designs are for larger listening rooms or to keep, high SPLs of sound over longer distances, which of course is really interesting. But they have designed a more reasonable sized range of speakers that I thought looked really nice. And what's interesting about them is that they are still active design and they are still line array in design. So they told me that you can get bigger, more grand scale of sound from smaller speakers as a result. And of course, that's really interesting. And here is my interview with them. So I'm here with Malte from B&M Speakers, and you guys are showing what looks like quite a traditional speaker in some regards, but it's completely not, isn't it? It's a whole new design. So can you maybe tell us about them, please?
Yeah, it's maybe the first very slim three-way fully active line source, which means it looks like a traditional slim floor-standing speaker, but it's more like a line array in terms of directivity, which is meant to give you more direct sound in less damped rooms, meaning you can, like even in a very big room, you can sit at 5 meters away or even more and still have a lot of direct sound and dynamics. And it's fully active, which means that there is an additional bass. It's on the side of the speaker, and it's a sensor-controlled bass, which means that a sensor is perfectly all the time monitoring the movement of the diaphragm. And in case there's any risk of booming or enhanced bass in the room, it will break it down, damp it, and so you have a very tight bass even in problematic rooms. And the idea is that modern living rooms, they require a speaker with a higher directivity index, and it's very difficult to achieve this in a small speaker, and it's really the first of its kind. The most important driver is the line source driver. It's a mid-high compression driver, and it's a bit like a horn, but it's not sounding like a horn. The directivity is more like a line array, which is meant to completely prevent reflections from the ceiling and the floor. So it's focusing the sound on the listener. And the mid-ranges, they're only active below 800 hertz. They're supporting this line array. In total, it's a bit like a big horn or a very, very big line source or an electrostatic speaker in terms of directivity, but it's much clearer and it's sounding much more transparent, and it's more like a conventional speaker when it comes to neutrality and transparency.
Yeah, because that's something we spoke about off camera, was like it's a smaller footprint speaker, but still intended to give you a big sound from a lesser footprint. And one other question, because it's an active speaker, does that mean you still need a separate streamer or turntable and obviously turntable? Do you still need a separate source and preamplifier? Or is that all built into the speaker?
No, you have to select an external source, meaning either a streamer or a preamplifier, but there's digital input as well as an analog one, so you're free to choose. And we also offer dedicated fully digital preamps, so you can hand over the signal into the speaker completely unchanged, meaning it's a fully digital chain, and you can also feed it with a turntable because it has an AD converter.
So one last question, I ask everybody this is the hardest question. If somebody's new to B&M speakers, what would be how would you categorize a B&M speaker sound?
Yeah, actually it used to be a bit more the typical active speaker, because B&M is doing fully active speakers for 51 years now, since 1974, and they used to be very precise, very dynamic, very treble rich, but over the years it has changed, so it's more like a direct, tight, homogeneous speaker. It's very time coherent. We have completely time coherent digital crossovers. So it's a very direct, but a very transparent experience, and very tight bass, very dry bass. That's what it's meant for.
So it's a really lovely looking product, really interesting technology. All I can say is thank you very much for coming on camera and telling me about it. Now for something that I was told would revolutionize hi-fi speaker design. And how many times have we heard that before? But this time, this really is something kind of different. Kudos Audio, who are a British speaker manufacturer, were showing their brand new crossover technology called Sigeo Drive. And this crossover technology is interesting because it's not a passive crossover and it's not an active crossover. It's like a combination of the two, but it's neither one nor the other, which is really interesting because it uses passive crossover components, which means it doesn't need electricity, it doesn't need any electrical signal going to the device, which means it doesn't introduce, or there's no noise or anything being introduced. But where the crossover sits in the signal path is before the amplifier, more like how an active speaker is designed. So Kudos Audio are saying with using this type of crossover, you have all of the benefits of an active crossover, but with none of the negatives that come along with that. So that really is something very different. and here is my interview with them. So I'm here with Derek from Kudos Audio, and you guys are showing, obviously at the Munich High End, a new type of speaker crossover that's never been seen really within hi-fi speakers before, which, if I've pronounced it correctly, is Sigao Drive? Sigao Drive. I knew I'd get it wrong. Yeah. So it's a really interesting technology development, but it's also totally different. So can you tell us about it, please?
It's an active crossover that's neither truly active or traditionally passive. What I mean by that is it does exactly the same job as an active crossover in front of the amplifiers, just like a traditional active crossover, but it's actually a passive device, so it does not plug into the mains. It has no power supply in there at all. It's never really been done commercially at all till now, mainly because it's passive. It doesn't have the buffer stages, etc., involved with the traditional active crossover, which basically means it has to match whatever power amplifier you're using, the input impedance of that amplifier. Normally, a traditional active crossover has a buffer stage that isolates it from that issue, for want of a better word. What we've done is actually completely circumnavigate that problem, if you want to call it that. What we have is there are little plug-in sockets on the back, which we put load plugs in, which then matches the circuit board in here absolutely completely to your chosen power amplifier. Be it Chord amplifiers here, it's got Chord plugs in the back, name, Lin, whatever, they all have their own different input impedance, and we match the crossover to your chosen amplifiers. The reasons for doing that is, as in any electronics, the noisiest thing in any electronics is always the power supply. So in traditional Kudos fashion, we like to keep things as simple as possible. So what did we want to do? We wanted to remove the noisiest part of the active crossover, but still keep the benefits of running a loudspeaker active. It works with every speaker that we do. All the speakers that are activatable, which at the moment is all of them, 2 different plugs to adjust the different settings for the different loudspeakers.
And one thing you mentioned in the press details is that it can work with any amplifier, so there's no limitations.
Any amplifier, all we need to know is what the input impedance of that is. We can usually, if we know what the amplifier is, we can usually find that out ourselves. If not, we'll contact the manufacturer, get that figure so we can do the matching load plugs.
Derek, man, thank you very much for coming on camera and talking to me about this. Really interesting new technology for speaker crossover. It's something we've not seen before, even though we've seen thousands of them. Nothing like this, so really interesting. Yeah, awesome, thank you. Lastly, I travelled to a completely different venue to go and see REL Acoustics, because REL were demonstrating a pretty wild system for a hotel bedroom, essentially, which I think had 6, maybe 10 subwoofers in it, which is pretty wild for any room. But the reason why I was there is because they was using a 6-pack of REL 812 subwoofers as part of a REL 3D home cinema system. And I've heard a REL 3D cinema system a number of times, but never with a 6-pack of subwoofers before. So I was there, I spoke to John Hunter about why you would do this and what would be the benefits, and here is that interview. So I'm here with John from REL, and John, I wanted to come and see you and have a look at your system because you've set up something really quite interesting here. You've got a home cinema system with a REL 3D bass array or setup, but you've also got a 6-pack of 812 subwoofers. So that's something I've not seen before. So why have you set the system up like this? What are the benefits? And yeah, maybe tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, so what 6-packs do isn't make more bass. They certainly can, right? But what they really do when you use them in a traditional musical application is they really restore the 3rd dimension, which is height. We get that wrong all the time in the industry. We think first dimension is left, right, front to back somehow is the 3rd dimension. No, that's the 2nd dimension. Height is the 3rd. As it turns out, you get exactly the same benefit in theater. And it's particularly true when you get into the larger theaters with bigger screens, or the really big ones with a pro projector, right? We've got perhaps a 15, 16-foot screen and a big Sony projector. And what you'll find is with a 6-pack, you get the elevation of sound, which is so hard to get, right? We've got a center channel speaker. It's almost inevitably below the screen. And the sound, if you listen carefully, never gets but about 1/3 of the way up. And when you have the 6-pack that restores height, you'll find it carries all the way up accurately to the top of the screen, and vocals locate in the center of the screen. And that's the technical reason we're doing it. Of course, the fact that it absolutely shreds this room is the fun part.
How have you configured the subwoofers to work with what channels, please?
What REL 3D is in 10 seconds or less is really simply restoring what Dolby always intended for home theater to be. They want all of the speakers to be full range. It's not a complex concept. It's what gives you the wraparound, puts you inside the action, right? So what you can see up here is we have a REL S510. It's actually connected directly to the rear of this speaker. This is a wonderful pair of speakers, a whole set of speakers from REL Acoustics here in Germany. And these are set to full range. Got a lovely little integra that actually lets you do true full range. And so what we're able to do is allow this to keep up with the dynamics of that. It's not too hard to figure out that if you're looking at the center channel, which is about a third the size of a normal speaker, and it's supposed to keep up with 2 normal speakers, it needs some help. And so what you get is all the restoration of bass. And I'm not just talking about the big obvious stuff, because this is hooked up high level. You hear timbres that are normal. Spoken word is easier to understand, right? The space that it's happening in is now easily understood. So those are some of the things that this does, and you've heard it. The takeaway is, oh my God, please put it back in when we remove it, right? In the rear, we've got 2 separate subs, and we actually have a hidden 1510 back here, just handling 0.1. So we actually have a classic 98 in the rear corner, lovely little piece you would never normally associate with home theater. But the beauty, it's a down-firing sub. So it puts out this massive carpeted bass, which is perfect for the 3D part of 3D, the dimensionality, because we don't need specificity and delicacy and attack. What we need is scale. And that gives us massive scale out of a very compact little package. By the way, we're going to have a new little surprise coming to you in about a week. We have a big brother on its way. Oh, wow. Yeah. So we're hard at work. And then we have 2 of our HT range, which are massive output, using a 1205 in the back, 1205 Mark II, and a 1510 back behind all this because, well, you can see we're in a hotel and we just don't have the room to put them everywhere.
So that is me done for another year of my Munich High End Hi-Fi show coverage, I suppose you could call it that. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found both of these videos, the last one and this one, interesting and enjoyable. And hopefully there's some products in there that's of interest to you. Because, again, the breadth of the hi-fi market is pretty massive. For me, my takeaways from the Munich High End 2024 was, or the bits that I really enjoyed the most were the human being interactions. That sounds really cheesy, but speaking to manufacturers, speaking to you guys, the viewers who came up and spoke to me, it really is rewarding when people come up to you and thank you for your work, because as a solo creator on YouTube, most of the time, you're just looking at numbers. How many people watched that video? How many people liked it and disliked it? And it's quite a solemn place to be. It can be quite a dark place to be at times. Trust me, anybody who's done this will understand. So actually being out in the real world and seeing the people that watch your videos, it's totally different. It kind of validates everything that you do, and it just makes you feel part of a greater community, which I think is probably the best bit about this show. And again, it's like the sheer size and scale. Being able to see lots of different things, giant and absolutely giant horn speakers, all the way through to headphones. That real diversity is what makes this particular hi-fi show special, I think, because manufacturers generally go all out. They try and do their best. They invest a huge amount of money and a huge amount of time to try and show us as much as possible. So I definitely would never want to be negative towards that type of event. Yes, you can moan about the music that's being played. Yes, you can moan that it's too hot when you get up to the top of the building. Yes, you can moan that your legs are aching, that your feet are aching, or you're tired after you spent 4 days there. And I'm still exhausted. It's been a couple of weeks. I'm still exhausted. But actually, while you're there, the atmosphere, the energy, and the whole event, it really is something special. So that's me done. Me done for another year. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully most of the products that have been featured throughout my 2 videos, I'll get something along the lines, something similar to those products in for review, or just, other things. So, the reason you make these videos is because hopefully it's going to lead on to more interesting things for you guys, the viewers, and obviously for me too as well. So thanks again for watching, especially if you watched both videos all the way through, and I'll see you soon. Take care.